Welcome to the Beacon Way podcast, hosted by award-winning executive team of Beacon Media and Marketing. With over 3 decades of experience, Adrian, Jennifer, and Ken give you an insider's view of what's working, what's not, and what's on the horizon for digital marketing. Grow your business today with the Beacon Way podcast.
Welcome back to the Beacon Way podcast. This is Jennifer. I'm your host today. And I've got Christoper Brown with Peak Psychotherapy. We're going to have a great conversation today. Thank you so much for joining.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So as I was researching Chris, I really wanted to have him on. He's got you've got such a compelling story personally. And it really moved me, just even in the little bit of work I do on the outskirts of this industry. I think people need to hear that part of your story, and then just where it's led you to, even in your work, in your career, in your life. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about how you got started in all this? Like what led you to even be in this profession, focusing on what you focus on?
Yeah, so that definitely started as a result of my military service. From 2004 to 2008, I was in the Marines, and I was an infantry guy. I went to war 3 times, twice to Iraq, once to Afghanistan, and a lot happened in those 4 years. I was wounded on my second deployment, along with half of my platoon. We had some pretty intense moments during all the deployments, but particularly that second one was quite an intense time. And so I got out of the military with PTSD. I was using alcohol to self-medicate and cope. And I have managed, and definitely had even stronger signs back then, of mild traumatic brain injury from being around explosions and physical ailments, which all led and contributed to symptoms of depression. And fortunately, it didn't take long, like literally a couple months, maybe at most, for my family to say, hey, something's different with you now, and encourage me to get into counseling. And so I worked with a therapist at the VA for between individual and group counseling, probably a good 2 years, like steadily. And at the time, I was using the GI Bill to get into school and pursue a new career path, because options are limited with infantry is the only thing on your resume.
Right.
So I started with the intention to go into computer information systems and to get into IT. And every now and then I wonder if that would have been a good call still, but I'm glad that I ended up on a different path, particularly now with the way that IT is looking.
Right.
But it was a year into those IT classes, I took a psychology course, and I had been in counseling for that year, and I was starting to see things a little differently. And after taking that psychology course, learning about the brain, it just opened up my eyes to new potential possibilities. And I had done the treatment that I pursued with my therapist was EMDR, which we'll probably talk about today. It was very effective at resolving some of the more intense day-to-day PTSD symptoms, which helped with the depression and everything else. And I determined that there was a point where I looked at the business cards of the therapists at that office, and I saw these letters behind their name, LICSW, which is what's behind my name on the screen here.
Right.
And I was like, what is that? What does this even mean? And I did some research, and I found out, oh, it's a master's level, and oh, it takes this many years, and oh, the VA might pay for it. And I was just like, that's it. That's all I need to know. And I just committed to that path. And after I graduated with my undergrad, I started a nonprofit, and I was running a nonprofit while doing, I took a year off, and then I started a part-time graduate program to get my MSW. So I was able to continue working on the nonprofit while in school and doing my internship and stuff. And that was a busy part of my life for sure. But when I graduated, I knew if I was going to become a licensed social worker, I needed, 4,000 hours of clinical time, and
Yeah,
it
just
wasn't
repeat
really
that for a
feasible.
second because I think people
Yeah,
don't realize what it takes to be a licensed, like it's 4,000 hours, right?
yeah.
Isn't that
I
just like
met,
clinical
I
and
think that my state has adjusted it since that requirement. It may only be 3,000 now in 2 years, but uh, for me, it was 4,000 in a minimum of 3 years that you had to
yeah.
do in order to be eligible to take the test to get licensed. And I took the test peak COVID with a mask on,
Wow.
having a panic attack. My heart was beating out of my chest, thinking it was crazy. But yeah, I did it. And the way that I did it was I was able to get hired at the same VA clinic that I was a client at before.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That's really
so that
cool.
was really, yeah, it was really cool to be able to pay it forward like that in such a tangible way.
Right.
And I remember day one getting hired there, I asked, when can I take the EMDR training? And within a few months, I was taking the basic training, starting to work with clients using EMDR, and having seen everything that it did for me,
Yeah.
I had a lot of confidence that it would be able to help the clients that I was seeing. And I did EMDR as in the EMDR world, there's like different tiers of certification and
Oh,
status.
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can be a basic trained therapist. You've taken the Andrea approved basic training, and some therapists will do that, and that's the extent of the credentialing that they pursue. And that allows you to be able to offer EMDR to clients. If therapists want to signal and demonstrate that they've taken the extra step, taken the extra training, done the extra consultation to really become a proficient, competent EMDR provider, that they can signal to the world, I know what I'm doing and I do it well, that would be the certified EMDR therapist credential. And that requires basically 20 hours of consultation, and I think 12 additional CEUs as a minimum, and then X amount of client hours, X amount of clients that you're doing EMDR with over the course of a few years. And so the next tier from that is consultant. And so this is somebody who has done even more training and consultation and time with clients, and has led their own group of therapists working toward consultation, or I'm sorry, working towards certification. And they are a trusted entity in the EMDR space, that they have enough competency and insight and expertise to help other newer EMDR providers hone their craft.
So they're
And
more
then,
mentoring and providing
yeah,
that oversight. Okay.
yeah. And then the tier above that is the trainers. And so these are the people who have been approved to offer a basic training to a therapist who's never done EMDR before, and to teach them the basic protocol and add in their own spin on EMDR approaches. And so you have to be credentialed before you can be a consultant, before you can be a trainer, is the idea. But these credentials, I think I've come to really appreciate as super important in being able to easily vet and understand how competent or skilled or experienced a provider might be with EMDR.
So is that something that people are looking for a therapist that does that, that they can tell like where they're at in that level too?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
That's the easy way.
Yeah.
There are providers like myself who I did EMDR daily pretty much for 6 years before I started to consider doing any of this credentialing stuff. And I think I was pretty good at EMDR at that point. I, I will say that after going through becoming a certified EMDR therapist and an approved consultant, I am much better now than I was after those 6 years. But I mentioned that to say there are many therapists who haven't done these extra certifications that are probably still competent in what they do,
Sure.
but it's not as easy to know without seeing those additional certifications. So it would require maybe some more questioning and curiosity, maybe interview the therapist to find out how experienced they really are.
So, have you worked with EMDR for people outside of the VA, outside, like with other issues besides the PTSD? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't work at the VA anymore. I've
Okay.
been in private practice for the last almost 2 years now. And when I was at the VA, the most common, we call them special applications. There's different protocols that EMDR providers can use. The most common one that I was using at the VA was the pain protocol, which what's the easy way to explain this? It targets an individual's experience with their pain. So like you could think of it as their relationship to the pain.
Okay.
It doesn't make pain disappear. It helps you develop more insight and more adaptive way of relating to the pain itself. And so it's a great pain management intervention. And with the clients I was seeing, essentially 90% of them were like PTSD focused clients, but due to the nature of their jobs and their lives and the way trauma affects the body, chronic pain was a very common occurrence. And EMDR pain protocol could be used to help at least mitigate and improve upon pain symptoms and make it more manageable. The other one that I use and I'm saying others as protocols separate from the basic protocol that targets trauma and adverse life experiences. The other one was the feeling state addiction protocol, which it's designed to help first identify and desensitize the positive feeling state that somebody might experience from addictive substance or behavior.
Wow, I hadn't even heard of that.
It's really cool. I love doing this one. Yeah, you desensitize the positive feeling state, and then the way that I conceptualize it is you start drilling down from there to help the client process the underlying, like, more distressing feeling that this addictive behavior might be addressing. And then from there, underlying negative cognition and emotions and getting to the meat and potatoes of it. And once we get to that point, we can usually identify like the thing or the time in their life where this all started. And then we basically do the basic protocol targeting sort of the formative reasons for the addictive behavior. And it's been this isn't the case with all the clients I've done it with, but enough to be noteworthy. I've literally had a few clients, when checking back on what does it feel like now when you think about going to the casino or having a drink, like the response is, I feel sick to my stomach. Like that just makes me uncomfortable to think about. Like, I don't know why I would want to do that based on all the work that I just did.
Wow. That's
And
gonna be so rewarding.
it is. I love it. It's so cool. Yeah. And it might be worth mentioning what the science says about EMDR and
I was
what's
just going to ask you
happening.
that. Yeah, I had a very powerful experience with EMDR, so I've been a fan of it for many years now.
Oh, cool.
but I didn't understand the science of it. And then when
Yeah.
I learned the science of it, it was interesting. It almost made it more impactful. It was just it gave me such an appreciation for our brains and just
Yeah.
how we're wired and just we're amazing and what we are able to do. And it can be used for bad because you do things that help you, but then you don't need that anymore. And
Yeah.
you need to figure out a way then to get through that. But yeah, I would love if you would give me even more information on that and our listeners. That would be great.
Yeah, of course. So there's been quite a bit of research on EMDR at this point. It was originally conceived in, I think, 89, late 80s, early 90s is when Dr. Shapiro started formulating these ideas and the basic protocol. And so there's been several decades of opportunities to research what's going on. I think there's still more research that should happen, but the things that I've zeroed in on as really insightful for what's going on with EMDR, I guess I should first say that EMDR is informed by what we call AIP, the AIP model, and adaptive information processing. And the premise is, I guess there's two premises. One, our brains in the right condition, in the right state, have an innate healing capacity.
Right.
And so what we want to do is help facilitate that state and let the brain heal itself. And so EMDR is actually counterintuitive for a lot of therapists because we lean on the trust of the tool and the client and try to stay out of the way a lot of times. And that can be counterintuitive to therapists who've come up from a different sort of framework or paradigm.
I could see
But
that.
anyways,
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
yeah. So there's the adaptive information way of conceptualizing this, and then the method in which we make that state exist is through the protocol, but specifically bilateral stimulation. And so bilateral stimulation is the term that we use to say what's happening when the eyes are moving back and forth.
Right.
And I think even today, the basic training, all the EMDR therapists learn how to do EMDR by moving their finger back and forth, having the client track their fingers with their eyes, because we want it to be as equitable and accessible as possible. And it's important to know that you can do it without any actual physical tools. But a lot of us use technology now to do the bilateral stimulation. And so that might look like a light bar. I'm a telehealth person, so I send the client a link and there's a dot on their screen that moves back and forth that I can control on my end. We can set up headphones that will beep left and right. When I was at the VA, I had the fancy light bar that did the lights, the headphones, and then had little buzzers that would vibrate left and right. So
yeah, that's what I did.
A lot of
at light
yeah.
bar. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So all this back and forth left and right is creating the bilateral stimulation. And when there's a few studies that have looked at what's going on in the brain when this bilateral stimulation occurs. And essentially it is activating the hippocampus, the memory recall center. And at the same time, it's not entirely, but noticeably suppressing the amygdala, like the fight or flight response center. And so we're creating a brain state that can more vividly recall memories while suppressing the potential for overwhelming activation of that memory. You could imagine, a term that we use is we're expanding the window of tolerance. And so with that expanded window of tolerance, with what's going on in the brain, this is a brain state that is ripe for efficiently processing and resolving the underlying. The way that we think of it is the stuck emotions, feelings, sensations that may have sort of been unable to adaptively process through during the trauma or during the adverse life experience. There's that book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? These things
That's
get
what I
stuck
read.
in us.
Yeah, that's what I read
And
after my experience, and it was just blew me
yeah,
away. Yeah.
yeah. So we're able to unstuck that stuff by creating the state where the brain can do its work. So that's a bit about the science without going too far down a rabbit hole. Oh, I do want to say one more thing about it, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Please.
I just think this is so fascinating. They did a study looking at brain imaging. What does the brain look like? What parts of the brain are lighting up when somebody's recalling a trauma?
Right.
Same person, same trauma. They took pictures before EMDR and after EMDR. And before EMDR, the parts that are lighting up are like we call it the primitive brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala, the center, and not a whole lot of activation in the cortex, the further part that makes us more unique as humans. But when they took the pictures after, now it's like part of the cortex back in the back region of the brain and no longer lighting up in the primitive part of the brain. And there's another term that we use called reconsolidation,
Right.
memory reconsolidation. And these images show this memory reconsolidation is like actually physically happening. The memory is moving to further away from the fight or flight switch, the sort of automatic nervous system response center, into a place that's more easily contained and not going to be triggered from ongoing life experiences as strongly. So it just fascinates me that we have pictures like that and studies that show what's going on, and seeing it play out real time with people and having lived it many times myself through EMDR as the client, the person on the receiving end of it. It just blows my mind how this all works.
It
But
does.
it's also,
It does for me too. Like, how do you not just the wonder of that? I was listening to actually another podcast a little while ago, and it was Dr. Amen, but he was talking about like how little we actually have studied the brain. And just we've studied so many different the heart, the lungs, like so many different things, but like how much do we really know about the brain? And I feel like this is like the era of the brain. Like we're getting to really start to understand and see. Yes, we've always known it's amazing, but it's almost like psychology and is crossing over not just from the emotional but into the physical. I think that's what blows me away about what's
yeah,
happening even with EMDR. We can connect the
yeah,
two.
yeah. And I do want to just add, while this is all really cool therapeutic intervention stuff, there's also examples from like ancient indigenous cultures and societies that if you imagine sitting in the middle of a drum circle, drums beating left and right, you're having this auditory bilateral stimulation while maybe processing something that just happened to the tribe. Vision quests. I was talking to somebody who went on a vision quest, and they get together, they talk about what they're trying to work through in their life, and then they go on a hike. And while you're hiking, your eyes are darting left and right, you're hearing sounds left and right, and something about that can help move things along. And actually, a walk in the park is how Francine Shapiro first discovered this eye movement connection to feeling better. So it's
That
not
that is
necessarily
really
like,
powerful. I had not made that connection. My husband and my kids are native, and my daughter is studying Indigenous, actually bringing back culture and how it applies to now. I'm going to bring that up
cool.
to her. That is really cool, Chris. That is something I had not heard of before. Is that common? Is that talked about in the like in your circles?
It's brought up, I think, a lot, maybe not as much as it could be. I think we're discovering also through, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit as well, like through the psychedelic healing practices, recognizing that ancient indigenous cultures have been using these for eons to
Right.
help people. I think that we're going to be seeing more of this sort of, I think of it as cross-pollination.
Yeah.
But I know that there are other labels that people might use, some positive, some not. But ultimately, I think we're doing our best with what we know and what we have to help people who are suffering. So yeah, it is talked about. We talk about the stuff that on the Andrea website, they put up all the most hit trainings from their annual conferences. And there are presentations that I've seen and know about that talk quite a bit about the roots of EMDR before it was EMDR.
EMDR. Okay. Yeah, I had not heard any of that, but as soon as you said it, it made so much sense. Even when my daughter was talking to me about as she's studying her people, her tribe, and just about like when they would go away from war and they would come back and they had a very like specific protocol of like things that they would do. And it was music and healing and conversation and walks and different things like that before they would even come back into their tribe.
Nice.
Because they had to work that through of what they had just experienced. So that's amazing.
Yeah, I wish we had something that was prescribed like that. I don't mean to say prescribed in the Western sense, but drawn out and just normalized as the thing we do. Because I have a lot of peers who I served with and who served in my sort of era who are either just now finding some sort of help or haven't even attempted to find any help. We had in the first few years of getting out, when I stopped using Facebook and stopped paying attention, we were up toward 20 suicides for my unit.
Room.
And this is something that I have become desensitized to because it's just been part of my job for so long. But when I think back on those early days and just how hard it would hit, like each time that could have been me. And each time when I check in with people about, did you talk to them? Did you hear anything? Did you suspect? It was almost always like unexpected. But these were also people who were isolating. They weren't necessarily engaging and trying to find support or help. They weren't confiding in our tribe. And that's honestly what led me to the focus of peer support with the nonprofit that I had started, seeing that it's almost like culturally we might need a little education and practice with
Yes.
being effective communicators and supporters. So I think that there's a lot we can learn from cultures who have already figured that out and done that for eons. Again, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe that in the right headspace, if we can bring different groups together and cross-pollinate ideas and approaches, that could be great. And I believe it's happening in places, but I haven't seen a whole lot on a macro scale quite yet.
There's some healing programs in Alaska. Wounded Warriors is one of them that, I mean, honestly, I think should be replicated throughout the nation because it really does incorporate many of the tribal and indigenous people, like it incorporates many things that I've learned through even just living here are just foundational things that we need as humans, which is community and relationship and surrounding each other when we're hurting, not isolating and being very pointed about it. So yeah, there are I don't think there's enough of it, but I have definitely seen examples of some pretty
Exactly.
amazing things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
So we just have a little bit of time left. And thank you so much for sharing your journey and how you got to where you are now. You mentioned psychedelic a little bit, and I know we could talk about this for a long time, but what started you on the path of thinking this might be worth looking at? Was it researching other cultures, what we're talking about?
Not really. I didn't know or discover that until I went down the rabbit hole of learning more about what the field looks like today. It was initially over the years, over the last few years, having clients just randomly, unbeknownst to me, not even really talking about it until after the fact, but going to a retreat, doing a ketamine infusions, things like this that they would do, and then they would come and check in with me, and I would notice that something seems different. They seem lighter. They seem to be, having a more positive, adaptive way of thinking and dealing with stress. And so I would just ask, what's different? And then they would tell me what they did. And I was still skeptical. So I would push a little further and ask the same kind of questions I normally would ask in a follow up after EMDR to see how perceptions might have shifted, to see how they might be holding on to stress or trauma. And I was shocked at receiving the same kind of responses I normally would hear after half a dozen EMDR sessions. And so that caught my attention. I was like, there's something going on here that I need to learn more about. And so I dove into research, reading the existing research articles on PubMed, reading Michael Pollan's book. That I think that's a first step for a lot of people who are going down that rabbit hole. How to Change Your Mind, I think is what it's called. And I think there was a Netflix special based on the book too.
Right.
But this piqued my interest, and I had the opportunity to take the 100-hour MAPS MDMA-assisted therapy. It was something during COVID, during COVID, through the Bronx VA at the time. And the trainers were Michael and Annie Mithofer, who led the first few phase trials for MAPS. And we were able to see videos in session of what's going on with clients while they're under the altered state of consciousness, and just amazed at what I was seeing, just the level of bringing down of defenses and ability, again, like the window of tolerance that I talked about with EMDR. It seems to exist with psychedelic therapies too. And there's actually a lot of parallels to how they were talking about how they understand psychedelics working and what it's doing in the brain, and how it's helping our innate healing intelligence, our innate healing capacity to show up and do its job. And the therapists are supposed to remain non-directive and stay out of the way. So I was like, this sounds a lot like what we're doing with EMDR already. But what really really made me think that it's not necessarily something that needs to compete with one another, but probably support or complement, was when I learned about the window of neuroplasticity that can occur after a psychedelic experience. Some of the research, depending on what you read, it's like from weeks to maybe even a few months after a psychedelic experience, the brain is in a more neuroplastic, malleable state, which basically means it's easier to develop new adaptive pathways. And so that's where I continue down the rabbit hole, and I learned about the importance of integration, which is the third phase of that 3-phase psychedelic-assisted therapy model that basically says we need to continue to do some work to integrate whatever may have come up or resulted from the plant medicine experience, and leverage. The way that I think of it is like we're leveraging that neuroplastic window to do like really good, efficient work that might have more potential for long-term staying power. And so that's where I landed in this journey, is seeing the potential of supporting clients with EMDR while they might be in that sort of integration phase after they've pursued a psychedelic experience independently. And living in Washington, we have ketamine clinics all around the Puget Sound region. That these are licensed providers who are offering ketamine-assisted therapy. And just south of us is Oregon, which has licensed psilocybin service centers. And I recognize that my client population, which is still predominantly folks with PTSD and who are suffering, they're going to be seeking whatever they can to alleviate their suffering. And unfortunately, without proper guidance and care, people can have a less than optimal experience when they pursue these psychedelic treatments. And so I've just made it known that I'm a therapist that can help if you need it after you might be, if you're pursuing this. And I'm not involved in the phase 2 with the plant medicine or anything like that. It's supporting people sometimes before, if they already have something planned, putting on a harm reduction lens. I think it's helpful for therapists to be able to at least help people understand risks and ethics and legal considerations. But really the bulk of it is post in the integration side. And so I've spent the last couple of years putting a lot of thought into this and have developed a loose conceptualization for EMDR providers on how to think about your role in somebody's therapeutic journey who might be planning or have already incorporated into psychedelic therapy in that process. And how do we conceptualize where EMDR fits in there and how to ultimately orient to what we're doing toward their treatment goals. And so that's another sort of special application with EMDR that we didn't get to earlier. And there are several others that we didn't get to either.
Well, we'll just have to meet again and go in depth, because this is the most comprehensive I've ever talked with anybody about it. I think it's really helpful to destigmatize. So I've recommended it to many people, and everyone I've recommended it to that's done it has had a good experience. But I think the more we know about it, the more educated, the more, if it's destigmatized, and just know there's a lot more people that could benefit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And really, I prefer the term adverse life experience to understand the kind of person that could benefit from EMDR, because the word trauma, it doesn't adequately capture all of the things that might affect someone's nervous system in a way that EMDR could resolve. So I would agree. There's a lot of people who would benefit from EMDR. I would go as far as saying most people might benefit from EMDR.
I agree. Especially when you think about that in the state of putting your brain in a healthy state to be able to process. So I did have success with it for 2 different things. One was some trauma that I experienced when I was younger. But the other thing that I had, which I didn't even think I needed it, but I was in a drive-by shooting, and the bullets came through the building where we were at. There was like 80 of us in there, and it didn't hit anybody, which is incredible. There's like 100 of us in this room, but I actually felt a bullet through the top of my hair.
Oh, wow.
And so it wasn't technically a trauma, and that,
Well,
yeah, maybe.
yeah,
I just
that's pretty
wasn't
traumatic.
I wasn't thinking of it that way because I was
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
But it was
But there was something that happened in that moment to your nervous system.
definitely.
Yeah.
But I guess just for me, I have a spectrum now of it being incredibly effective for multiple different things. What I would associate like childhood trauma to an event that if I hadn't done that, I believe I would be very affected today, because it was starting to cause nightmares, sounds, response, all the typical things that you would think of.
We're using EMDR to help athletes recover from injuries or performance anxiety.
Wow.
I don't know if you've heard the term yips, but
No.
it's like a mental block that makes it difficult for even pros to do basic motor tasks toward what they normally would do with ease without even thinking. It's really common, I think most common in golf players and baseball players.
So they get stuck, right? They get that.
Yeah, it's something stuck. It actually stuck, and physically it's pretty crazy. But doctorate students who are dealing with high stress, like overly stressed, just constant grind, these are not traumas, but the nervous system reacts to these things.
Right.
And anything, there's so many examples that the nervous system might have that sort of stuck reaction to. Like that's all fair game for EMDR.
Wow. That was really great information. I'm excited to get the feedback on this podcast and questions. If you guys want to reach out to Chris, so I know you're in Bellingham, Washington, right? And that's where Peak Psychotherapy is? I'm
telehealth only. So
telehealth. Okay.
I can see anyone that lives in Washington State or Arizona. That's where those are the states I'm currently licensed.
Got it. Okay. But they can reach, if you guys are in Washington or Arizona or you have questions, please reach out. We'll put his website as the links. And thanks for joining us with this great conversation on the Beacon Way today.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Beacon Way podcast. Make sure to join us for new episodes every week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Beacon Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.